All right, greetings and salutations. This is Schaeffer Cox's pre-sentence report. This came out just before they sent him to prison for 26 years. Schaeffer sent this in the email, in the mail yesterday. And I thought I would just document it in a YouTube video so it doesn't get lost in my piles and piles of letters. So this is page 1 of the pre-sentence report. Schaeffer highlights this sentence. I guess this is by the government. So this would be Yvonne Lamouret, Joseph Bottini, and Stephen Scrocchi. They say we would add that the 4-level enhancement also applies under 2K2.1B6A for possession of firearms and ammunition with knowledge, intent, or reason to believe that it would be transported out of the United States. Then in the index, or to the side, Schaeffer writes, "So Scrocchi tells the jury I was lying about leaving the country, but then turns around and asks for a 4-level enhancement because I was leaving the country." So that just goes to show you the deception of Stephen Scrocchi, Karen Loeffler, Yvonne Lamouret, and Joseph Bottini. Let's continue. Move this over just a little bit. No comments on that page. Oh, was there a comment? Sometimes the comments are highlighted, but I don't see any on that page. Okay, page 3. This is a email from Derek Espeland. I think it's to Sandra Klein, who was Bill Fulton's handler. And the FBI agent says Schaeffer Cox was exposed as a self-aggrandizing fraud. He did not have a plan at all. Keep in mind, he was convicted for 26 years for having a plan to conspire to murder federal agents. But this email right here clearly shows that the FBI knew that he did not have a plan at all. Even if he had a plan, there were allegedly other plans to off, which means to kill, Schaeffer Cox 48 hours after the revolution began. Schaeffer Cox has gone from a cadre of 24 down to 2. Him and his number 2, I think he means Zerby, not Derby. In any event, this is an email that clearly shows that the government knew Schaeffer Cox did not have a plan. Yet they convicted him of 26 years of having a plan. Remember, Bill Fulton stuck a knife to Les Zerby's throat and said, "What's the plan?" Because Les Zerby just said, "We don't have a plan." On page 4, Schaeffer Cox highlighted, Schaeffer Cox is not willing to meet with CHS-2, which would be Bill Fulton, does not want him to know he is still in Fairbanks, which is additional evidence that Schaeffer Cox was trying to resist the violent threats and the violent attacks from Bill Fulton. And he was operating under self-defense because Bill Fulton was threatening his life. He goes on to highlight once CHS-1, which would be Olson, to broker deal, SC willing to meet Trucker to discuss transport. So this is clearly showing that the only plan that Schaeffer Cox had was to get away from these reprobate, degenerate whores working for the government and to get out of the country with his children and his family. So this is another I guess, email from the FBI to Richard Sutherland. Richard Sutherland was Olson's handler. It says, "We need to listen to the audio before we tell Scrocchi. The CHS, confidential human source, in this case would be Olson, info has not been 100% accurate before." So they admit that their whores, Olson and Fulton, are not accurate. All right. He also highlights this part. As to February 12, 2011 meeting, FBI Special Agent Sutherland, who was Olson's handler, wrote in an email dated February 13th, "Listen to most of the audio, great quality, CHS info validated. Do not feel it will support prosecution." So even the FBI handler, the reprobate degenerate from on a fast train to hell, FBI Special Agent Sutherland, who likes to arrest little teenagers and put them in prison for multiple years for picking up his wife's wallet, does not feel that the audio supported prosecution. Schaeffer also highlights, I wonder if anything would really even come out of it other than we'll be dead and our wives and children will be left to themselves. I don't think that people around us won't see us as martyrs. And then somebody said no, and then Cox says it'll be a fruitless gesture. So Cox rejects another call for violence. The FBI knows that he rejected a call for violence. It can't be any more clear than saying it'll be a fruitless gesture. And then it goes on to say, after the February 19th, 2011 meeting, FBI Special Agent Sutherland wrote in an email dated February 19th, meeting is over, no immediate threat to law enforcement officials or judicial official identified by CHS. So even the government knew that Schaeffer Cox and his militia was not a threat. This is in an email from Scrocky, dated March 5th, 2011. The first few minutes, Barney and CS are talking about grenades, but talking about a rumor that Cox has grenades off Wainwright. Nobody, and I mean up to now, nobody says that there are grenades on the property. Yeah, that's, just because you get a audio of people talking about grenades don't mean they own grenades. I talk about grenades. That don't mean I own live grenades. Another thing that he highlighted is, I think it is fair to say his verbal reporting is not 100% accurate, and that is understandable. Okay, that's yet another example of the confidential human sources being liars. Okay, if we go on, he highlights, my plan is to hide, to avoid. If I get busted, if I get captured, I'm going to do a Rambo. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do a Rambo. Let me read that again. I'm not going to do a Rambo. I'm going to do a Gandhi. Yet another example of how Schaeffer Cox avoided violence. Schaeffer Cox is recorded yet again as to say, do everything we can to avoid it. So Schaeffer Cox was yet again trying to do everything he can to avoid violence. Scrocky wrote another letter. It says, listen to the conversation from last night. In summary, they are kicking around ideas. He highlights, Schaeffer highlights, 2 for 1 stands for if they take one of us, we take 2 of them. But they discuss not being strong enough to impose their views on the rule of law. They discuss everything from 2 for 1 to fleeing to the rapture coming and waiting for that. In my view, the FBI source is pushing Cox a bit too hard on not getting arrested, and the source agrees too much in moving their plans forward, which would generate a response, whether violent or not. The source adds, why don't we make it a 5 for 1? Not a good idea. FBI has to fix this. After some discussion of 2 for 1, Cox says, we're just speculating here, and I want to hear where you stand. Cox says that he would be morally correct in shooting a judge, but adds that he doesn't want to do that. So he makes the big pronouncement, then backs off. The typical will but not just yet type stuff. Schaeffer then also highlights, he claims the police are afraid of all of them and asks, what do you guys think about this then? And after getting various responses, none saying let's go grab or harm people tomorrow, he ends it with bluff it, play, and dream, but adds something that sounds like pull guns. Schaeffer writes to the side, not pull guns, I said praying to God. So Scrocky has selective hearing. Also, he doesn't say play there, he says pray. It's very obvious he wants wiggle room. Cox discussed Operation 2 for 1. Cox said that there would not be a 2 for 1 response if Vernon's house was seized. Cox said that he had lost his business and his residence and that Vernon needed to be prepared to lose his. Cox said that they did not have enough support to pull off a 2 for 1 operative and survive. The jury categorically rejected the prosecution's allegations that this was a murderous plot to kill federal officials at the King Jesus North Pole, but was instead a plan to lawfully defend themselves if attacked by non-uniformed agents who began shooting without identifying themselves. Richard Sutherland's email says his plan involves civil disobedience, media coverage, and a declaration. Number 6, he plans to call on the troopers and demand a truce. In a recorded meeting with a CH5, he stated over and over that he did not want violence and that he did not want to see any cops hurt. He has an armed militia security team with C5 gas and Hornet grenades as a diversion squad if needed. Schaeffer highlighted, and his exact words were that some of the issues that been going on with Schaeffer Cox that the OCS issue actually may resolve the problem that they had, because he said that Schaeffer Cox had made some threats in reference to OCS. He said that he had said that he was not going to give up his son and that he wouldn't let anybody take his family. And I believe the exact verbiage he had used was that Schaeffer Cox would turn Fairbanks into a bloodbath before he would give up his child. And so the U.S. Marshal said, based off the statement, that when OCS would go to Schaeffer Cox's house to get his son, law enforcement would be present. He also stated that they believed, based off his statement, that Schaeffer Cox would probably use force to prevent them from taking his child, and if he did so, then he would most likely be shot and killed in this scenario. Whatever the problem was with Schaeffer Cox, if he was killed with OCS attempting to take his son, then obviously anything that had to do with him wouldn't matter anymore. This appears to be some sort of email from Gary Michael. To follow up on my conversation this morning, we must be careful in responding to Cox to not act like him. He tells his folks that an assassination squad is up from Colorado to kill him. His homies talk about the same among themselves. He hears it from somebody that heard it from him, and all of a sudden it's confirmed. Okay, Cox also hollered, not a specific plan. There was never a specific plan to murder anybody. In addition, Mr. Cox told Anderson that he thought there was a hit team out to get him and wanted to see if Anderson could find the names of the hit team members. Anderson testified that Mr. Cox never said he wanted to overthrow the government, and he never heard Mr. Cox espouse killing people to overthrow the government. Cox never said to Anderson that he was going to shoot anyone on the list. As to the list, even the government expressed uncertainty as to the intent behind it. Special Agent Sutherland wrote in an email dated March 3, 2011, a mere 7 days before the arrest, any idea of Cox's intention with the list, especially in light of the fact that he is leaving? Is this the target list of law enforcement and judges? Yes, the list of LEOs and targets. No known intentions other than more potential deterrence. So this list they keep referring to, there was never an intent for Schaeffer to kill anybody on that list, and they knew that. CI1, Confidential Informant 1, wanted the list and volunteered to contact Anderson to try to get it. By this time, Mr. Cox's primary interest was in leaving Alaska. Mr. Cox had asked for Mr. Anderson's help in trying to find out who might be on the hit squad he believed was out to kill him. Schaeffer was constantly operating in the state of mind that his own life and his family's life were in danger by Fulton and Aaron Bennett. Mr. Cox maintains that he believed if he was arrested, some militia members would react violently. See paragraph 65 of PreSentence Report, where CI2 Fulton says that he will react and rise up if something happened to Mr. Cox. There is a good deal of evidence that Mr. Cox was indeed fearful of CI2 Fulton. The best evidence of this was when Fulton attacked Les Zerby, according to some, pulled a knife and threatened to slit his throat after Fulton was told by Zerby and Mr. Cox that they did not have any plan to arrest judges. Mr. Cox does not deny he discussed purchasing the silencers from CI2, but on March the 10th, he believed the purpose of the meeting was to meet the trucker, as Mr. Cox was anxious to leave Alaska. It was not until Mr. Cox got in the car that CI1 told Mr. Cox about the weapon. CI1 said he had not wanted to mention these things on the telephone. And they're $50 a piece. He'll come down on those, and they're, what are they, the M74s? Cox, I don't know. Yeah, well, that's tough. That's, Mr. Cox built the homemade silencer in 2008 when he received the How-To DVD. This was long before the alleged conspiracy commenced. The ATF agent could not tell if the Sten was operable. No powder was found on the firearm. Mr. Cox had been rebuilding this firearm for many years as a World War II relic. Mr. Cox did meet the ATF agent Cahoon and come away from that meeting believing that homemade firearms that did not travel interstate commerce did not have to be registered. ATF agent Cahoon recalled the meeting but did not recall such a discussion. Both Mr. Anderson and Philip Clark were present and did recall a discussion about firearms and interstate commerce. Here, there were no violent confrontations and no immediate plan to engage in such a confrontation. The government conceded in closing argument that we're not telling you that it was going to happen today, that it was going to happen tomorrow, that it was going to happen next week, but because The fact of the matter is, this whole case is about when we're going to be strong enough. On March the 10th, although arrested while being shown illegal silencers and grenades, it is clear that Cox believed he was also going to meet the trucker who would transport he and his family out of Alaska. Mr. Cox was not then preparing to imminently execute any murder of government officials. Mr. Cox was acquitted in counts 7 and 15 of carrying a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence, including counts 1 through 12. Given that verdict and the fact that Mr. Cox routinely carried a firearm when he was wearing body armor, it appears that the jury believed that there was no discrete crime of violence, and that was committed only a conspiracy to do so at some indeterminate time in the future. I believe it should be noted in the body of the pre-sentencing report that both Hornet's Nest canisters and the 37mm launchers are lawfully sold without any registration requirement. The fact that these items are readily and legally available distinguishes this case from other cases where the destructive device at issue involves wholly illegal items. An emergency meeting was called for the evening of Sunday, June the 13th, 2010, to discuss Schaeffer Cox's plans. The meeting was supposed to start at 8 p.m. Cox's second-in-command, Les Derby, arrived at 8:40 p.m. and Cox did not arrive until 9:30. By that time, those in attendance had consumed alcohol and discussed Cox's over-controlling character, and many in the movement did not care for him. The general consensus was that if Cox was to start the revolution, the movement have someone kill him after 48 hours. Cox is a member of the leader of the Alaska Peacemakers militia. However, the CHS believes this organization is defunct since Cox was exposed as a fraud during the meeting on Sunday evening. Most of the people at the meeting were probably government informants. The evidence adduced at trial and in discovery suggests that the attempt to induce Mr. Cox to purchase a silencer and hand grenades in March 10, 2011 was intended to enhance Mr. Cox's sentence rather than to further an investigation. Indeed, Special Agent Sutherland's trial testimony supports this, as do emails from the AUSA. Agent Sutherland testified that last page. Paragraph 223, defense counsel wrote, while we completely agree with the comments in paragraph 223 that while the defendant's conduct was serious, no actual physical harm to the target victims occurred, it is important to include the following facts as well. By the time of his arrest on March the 10th, 2011, Mr. Cox was planning to leave the state. He had abandoned his home and his businesses. He was seeking a way for he and his family to leave the state of Alaska. He only stayed until March the 10th because of the ruse the government played in delaying the arrival of the fictitious trucker who was supposed to transport Mr. Cox and his family out of Alaska. In addition, Mr. Cox was described by this point in time by CI1 Olson. The CHS said that Cox is trying to grow a beard and that Cox seems fatigued and really ready to leave the state. After March 4, 2011 meeting with Mr. Cox, CI1 told Agent Sutherland Cox seemed down and the fugitive status seemed to be weighing on him. Cox is ready to leave the state. Cox is ready to meet the trucker who will transport him. All right, that's the highlights of the pre-sentencing report. It's 24 pages. I wanted to get that into a YouTube video for reference. The only evidence that they ever had was that Cox was trying to leave the state of Alaska because the confidential human sources were agent provocateurs, and some of them were threatening Cox's life. God bless every one of you and have a great day.